Alright everyone, welcome, happy Tuesday. How is everyone doing today? How are all my freaks and my peeps doing? Oh my god. I had a weekend. It was the daughter's birthday on Saturday, so we had this party at the Devil's Lake. Just a second, the wife. Trying to prove my programming skills. I think I'm about to move from front end to back end. So think about it. Yep. It's if you can do both is amazing. Back end is where a lot of the money is. If you can do that stuff, and front end, of course, is good money too. Cool. Programming's awesome. Yeah, web is only going to get more and more. Yeah. Oh yeah, web is where it's at. Of course, you always need the servers to make it run. Without the servers to make it run, the front can't do anything. So you definitely need both. And the ones that are paid a lot are the ones that can do both. Now, when I was really active in that, there are some people who start out as graphics designers, and then they get into the front end and actually how to put web pages together well. Then they get into the back end as well, and actually putting sites together like Drupal or WordPress or something like that. Yeah, it's whole different skill sets. But if you know both, you can get paid very good money for it. So yeah, we had my daughter's birthday at the lake outside, and we had to reserve our space. Like, we got there at 8 in the morning, put up the tent and everything to, in the blankets and stuff out. And so I stayed there from 8 o'clock in the morning until at least noon when the party actually started. And then kids and people showed up, and I didn't leave there until almost 4 o'clock. So tired. It was hot. It was windy. It was outside. It was horrible. Horrible, and there were people everywhere. It was just not cool. But my daughter had fun. She had a lot of fun. And I did get to play some Othello, which was unusual. One of the wife of the couple that we used to play with, prior to the pandemic, every Wednesday, she brought the Othello, and we played Othello quite a bit. So that was kind of neat. Got to distract me from all the yelling and the screaming and the children and all that sort of stuff. So that was good. But I was so sore yesterday when we were done. So tired. I'm still a bit sore today, actually. Need to do some yoga to help get my muscles and back recovered from that day of craziness. Rockford from Chippendale, but not cheesy. Not cheese. Mooney. It's been years since I've seen that. I was in high school, probably the last time I watched Chippendales. I'd go over to I think it was maybe before school, a friend of mine's house, and we'd watch cartoons before we went to school. Here's after school. I don't know, one of the two. Yeah. Chippendales Rescue Rangers. Oh yeah, those are the days. Back when I was young. Long time ago. Yeah, so that's my weekend. Just dealing with prepping for the child's birthday party and the birthday party at the lake. And actually I had D&D on Saturday. I got there late. God, it was closer to 6:30 by the time I actually got showered and all the stuff put away and everything. But I did get there. Not Edge. If it's Microsoft, it's the devil. I use Chrome, preferably, and then Firefox, and then Edge. Yeah, like at home here, for testing and stuff, I use Chrome and Firefox. Not that I haven't really done much of that in a few years now. But yeah, Chrome and Firefox first, because they tend to be the most standards compliant, and then Edge, and then Internet Explorer, whatever it is. Despite the fact I work at Yandex browser. Well, that's pretty cool. What's that based off of? Is that its own thing? That's Chinese, right? No, Russian. Chinese? The hell is that? Work. Don't think I've ever used it. Shitty as fuck. Really? Okay. I won't waste my time then. You're honest. Appreciate that. Yeah, testing Chrome, Firefox, Edge. Then you can kind of loop out from there and see what they're doing. When you're asking that question, if you're considering a browser, see what the browser core is, because some of the browsers are using Chrome as their base. So you might be able to just deal with most of them just by using the most modern Chrome, although most will be using a branch of Chrome which is older. Didn't Safari switch to Chrome, I think? It was Opera. Opera switched to Chrome or something like that. I don't know. Yeah, it used to be Chrome, Firefox, Opera, Safari, and then last would be Edge. Chromium, not Chrome. Ah, okay. You should not leave passwords and other things in it. Not a safety. Okay, good to know. Not gonna download it, but for everyone else to know, that's good. Yeah, I haven't done any front-end development in quite a while. I don't even mess with it so much. It's almost all politics. That's all I do. And administration, website administration on Drupal. That's pretty much all I do now. Right now I'm working on a editable PDF for one of the departments. We have the Arts, Humanities, and Historic Preservation committee within the... No, that's the department. Yeah, they have a grant, so I'm working on an editable PDF for their grant. I have to deal with this every year. It's not a big deal. It's a bit of work, but it's do it every year. They've got like 1 or 2 application forms that are 4 or 5 pages long with calculatable fields and stuff like that. Most popular here is that it is obvious and actually easy to get the biggest salary here. Okay. Big salary is good. Can't complain about that. Yeah, I woke up at like 4 this evening, and I just couldn't get back to sleep because I was warm. And then the sun started coming out about 5:30, something like that, and I couldn't get back to sleep. So I've lost like 3 or 4 hours of sleep today. So I'm not all that with it from that standpoint. But I'm doing okay considering. All right. So this is a giant ass post. It's gonna be, I don't know if it's anywhere as long as the previous one. Use Yahoo. How about AOL? The AOL browser? That was a thing, right? Back in the day. This is a huge post, much like the previous ProPublica post that we went over a week or so ago. So if you want to get drinks and a snack, now's a good time to do it. This is another one of these enraging 1% abusing the system, rage-filled posts that we're going to go through here. And this is specific to the United States, because we're going to be specifically talking about the Roth IRA, which is an investment thing here in the United States. This is big. ProPublica goes through and they do a great job of ripping things apart and putting it back together again with graphs and all of that. So I'll wait a little bit so you guys can go get snacks or whatever, and then we can get started here. It's gonna be this will probably be the first hour. Much like the previous ProPublica one we went through was about an hour as well. So, Lord of the Roths, how tech mogul Peter Thiel turned a retirement account for the middle class into a $5 billion tax-free piggy bank. Peter Thiel is, I think he was part of PayPal. Was he PayPal and Amazon? Or was he just PayPal? Founder of PayPal, yep. So we're gonna go over this. Now, to his credit, this is all legal. It just happened to get some decent advice and happened to turn the Roth IRA into this amazing thing for him to get billions of dollars that, you know, you and I could do too if we were rolling the bills like he was, right? But this is a bit nutsy. It's a good example of why we need a minimum wage, a maximum wage, and a wealth tax, as well as destroying that barrier between wealth and income. And that will deal with most of most of this bullshit. All right, we'll start here. Oh no, co-founder of Palantir. Oh yeah, aren't they a security place, right? That's their security place, right? And Palantir's from Lord of the Rings, the crystal ball thing that Saruman used to look at, to see things through. That Sauron could see through, that Saruman had one of and corrupted him. Right? I think I got that right. Popular defense contractor. Oh, defense contractor. Ah, I thought they were security. Okay. That makes them even worse. Fuck them. Defense contractors can bite it. Arrgh. All right. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to get a snack and a drink. Get ready to go. We'll start reading this giant ass post. All right. So again, Lord of the Roths, how tech mogul Peter Thiel turned a retirement account for the middle class into a $5 billion tax-free piggy motherfucking bank. Run! Roth IRAs were intended to help average working Americans save, but IRS records show Thiel and other ultra-wealthy investors have used them to amass vast untaxed fortunes. Billionaire Peter Thiel, a founder of PayPal, has publicly condemned confiscatory taxes. Fucking one percenter. He's been a major funder for one of the most prominent anti-tax political action committees in the country, and he's bankrolled a group that promotes building floating nations that would impose no compulsory income taxes. Okay, so yeah, I think we covered this, last year, that he was looking at building a floating nation, doing just this. No taxes, no real laws, at least beyond ones that he was going to set. Now, see, this in and of itself, I don't have a problem with building this. I've been a member of micronationalism and that sort of thing. Sealand was a very famous example of micronation that was set up on an abandoned oil rig in maritime law area. So it would be interesting, but you know what these ultra-rich people are going to end up turning these into. Nothing good. But Thiel doesn't need a man-made island to avoid paying taxes. He has something just as effective, a Roth individual retirement account. Over the last 20 years, Thiel has quietly turned his Roth IRA, a humdrum retirement vehicle intended to spur Americans to save for their golden years, into a gargantuan tax-empty piggy bank. Confidential IRS data shows. Using stock deals unavailable to most people, Thiel has taken a retirement account worth less than $2,000 in 1999 and spun it into a $5 billion windfall. Now, if I remember correctly, a Roth IRA is an IRA is an individual retirement account, and a Roth IRA is a type of IRA that is, you can put money into it and it's post-tax money, so you've already paid taxes on the money before it goes into it, so that once it goes into the Roth IRA, you can withdraw anything you make from it tax-free, which is a good deal. However, again, like they're saying here, because he's rich, he has access to things that most people don't have access to. Therefore, he can really turn this into something that's just gross. All right, to put that into perspective, here's how much the average Roth was worth at the end of 2018: $39,108 versus his $5 billion. And here's how much $5 billion is if every one of the 2.3 million people in Houston, Texas were to deposit $2,000 into a bank today. Those accounts still wouldn't have what Thiel has in his Roth IRA. Just a second, the wife again. What's more, as long as Thiel waits to withdraw his money until April 2027, when he is 6 months shy of his 60th birthday, you will never have to pay a penny of tax on those billions. ProPublica has obtained a trove of IRS tax return data on thousands of the country's wealthiest people, covering more than 15 years. This data provides, for the first time, an inside look at the financial lives of the richest Americans, those whose stratospheric fortunes put them among history's wealthiest individuals. What the secret information reveals is that while most Americans are dutifully paying taxes, chipping in their part to fund the military, highways, and safety net programs, the country's richest citizens are finding ways to sidestep the system. One of the most surprising of these techniques involves the Roth IRA, which limits most people to contributing just $6,000 each year. Now, I expect he's probably using, I think you can use the Roth IRA as a self-directed IRA, which means you can take the funds in there and invest it in various other things. Like I think you can put a house into an IRA. I think you can put stock into a Roth IRA as well. I think that's kind of where where this is going insane. The late Senator William Roth Jr., a Delaware Republican, pushed through a law establishing the Roth IRA in 1997 to allow hardworking middle-class Americans to stow away money tax-free for retirement. The Clinton administration didn't want to give a fat tax break to wealthy people who were likely to save anyway, so blocked Americans making more than $110,000 or $160,000 for a couple per year from using them, and capped annual contributions back then at $2,000. Okay, yet from the start, a small number of entrepreneurs like Thiel made an end run around the rules. Open a Roth IRA with $2,000 or less, get a sweetheart deal to buy a stake in a startup that has a good chance of one day exploding in value. Pay just fractions of a penny per share and a price low enough to buy huge numbers of shares. Watch as all the gains on that stock, no matter how giant, are shielded from taxes forever, as long as the IRA remains untouched until 59.5. Then use the proceeds, still in the Roth, to make other investments. Yeah, so that's kind of what I was saying. More of a, I don't know if this is specifically falling under a self-directed IRA sort of thing, but there must have been a special deal allowing them to get shares for pennies on a dollar inside the Roth. About a decade after the creation of the Roth, Congress made it even easier to turn the accounts into mammoth tax shelters. It allowed everyone, including the very richest Americans, to take money they'd stowed in less favorable traditional retirement accounts and, after paying a one-time tax, shift them to a Roth where their money could grow unchecked by Uncle Sam, a Bermuda-style tax haven right here in the U.S. So yeah, because then, obviously when you first put money into it, there's no interest on it. But once you get it in there, then you've got the advantage of compounding interest over, however many years. To identify those who've amassed fortunes in retirement accounts, ProPublica scoured the tax return data of the ultra-wealthy for IRA accounts valued at more than $20 million. Reporters also examined Securities and Exchange Commission filings, court documents, and other records, including a memo detailing Thiel's wealth that was included in his 2005 application for residency in New Zealand. How the hell did they get that? That's interesting. Among this rarefied group, ProPublica found the term individual retirement account has become a misnomer. Rather than a way to build a nest egg for old age, the accounts have morphed into supercharged investment vehicles subsidized by American taxpayers. Ted Wesher, a deputy of Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway, had $262.4 million in his Roth account at the end of 2018. Hedge fund manager Randall Smith, whose Alden Global Capital has gutted newspapers around the country, has $252.6 million in his. That's insane. Buffett, one of the richest men in the world and a vocal supporter of higher taxes on the rich, also is making use of a Roth. At the end of 2018, Buffett had $20.2 million in it. Former Renaissance Technologies hedge fund managers Robert Mercer had $31.5 million in his Roth, the records show. Buffett didn't respond to questions sent by email. Mercer couldn't be reached for comment, and his accountants and attorneys didn't respond to requests to accept questions on his behalf. Smith also couldn't be reached for comment, and an employee at his hedge fund repeatedly hung up when ProPublica reporters identified themselves. Other representatives for Smith and his hedge fund didn't respond. In a written statement, Weschler said his retirement account relied on publicly traded investments and strategies available to all taxpayers. Not really, because we're not rich. We're not rolling in the dough. Nevertheless, he supports reforming the system. Although I've been an enormous beneficiary of the IRA mechanism, I personally do not feel the tax shield afforded me by my IRA is necessarily good tax policy, he wrote. To this end, I'm openly supportive of modifying the benefit afforded to retirement accounts once they exceed a certain threshold. Okay. Don't police you, but it would be better if you would say, replace the words insane and wild. To avoid able. Okay. Okay. I'll try and remember that. I'll try and remember that. Thank you. All right. A spokesman for Thiel accepted detailed questions on Thiel's behalf, then never responded to phone calls or emails. Messages left at Thiel's venture capital fund were not returned. While the scope and scale of such accounts has never been publicly documented, Congress has long been aware of their existence and the ballooning tax breaks they were garnering for the ultra-wealthy. The Government Accountability Office, the investigative arm of Congress, for years has warned that the wealthiest Americans were accumulating massive retirement accounts in ways federal lawmakers never intended. Yeah, again, minimum wage, maximum wage, getting rid of the wall between wealth and setting a maximum, at $250,000. Well, to have a wealth tax for things like this, and then consider that sort of stuff as income as well, and then tax it down to $675,000 with a 100% marginal tax rate to get rid of all of it. At the same time, Congress has slashed the IRS budget so severely that the agency's ability to ferret out abuses has been stymied. Money was so tight that at one point in 2015, the agency couldn't afford to enter critical data about IRAs from paper tax filings into its computer system. Yeah, of course. And we've talked about this before. The IRS does not have the manpower or the money to afford looking into rich people and corporations and things of that nature. So, again, gutting the IRA, the IRS makes it much easier for the rich people to get by with sort of abuses that they do, much like they're talking about here. Over the years, a few politicians have tried and failed to crack down on the tax breaks the ultra rich receive from their giant IRAs. In 2016, Senator Ron Wyden, an Oregon Democrat, floated a detailed reform plan and said, "It's time to face the fact that our tax code needs a dose of fairness when it comes to retirement savings, and that starts with cracking down on massive Roth IRA accounts built on assets from sweetheart inside deals. Tax incentives for retirement savings," he added at the time, "are designed to help people build a nest egg, not a golden egg." But Wyden soon abandoned his proposal. There was no chance Republican-controlled Senate would pass it. Meanwhile, Thiel's Roth grew and grew. At the end of 2019, it hit the $5 billion mark, jumping more than $3 billion in just 3 years' time. Oh my God, all of it tax-free. Jumped more than $3 billion in just 3 years. Thiel, a fan of J.R.R. Tolkien, by then had brought his Roth under the auspices of a family trust company called Rivendell Trust. In The Lord of the Rings, Rivendell is a secret valley populated by elves, a misty sanctuary against the forces of darkness. Thiel's earthly version resides in a suburban Las Vegas office complex across from a cheesecake factory and is staffed by a small group of corporate lawyers. Of course it is. Yeah, trust, again, we talked about this a little bit before. Trusts are a large part of how you can help shield your finances from taxes and stuff like that. And thanks to Roth, Thiel's fortune is far more vast than even experts in tallying the wealth of the rich believed. In 2019, Forbes put Thiel's total net worth at just $2.3 billion. That was less than half of what Roth alone was worth. Okay, so now we're gonna get into a bunch of their graphics here. How humdrum retirement accounts become mega tax shelters for the rich. Contributions to a Roth IRA are capped at $6,000 per year for most people, but some of the wealthiest Americans have found ways to grow their Roth IRAs to millions, even billions of dollars tax-free, and here's how. All right, so you got your Roth IRA starting out with $1,000. You contribute $1,000 to your Roth IRA. Then, in a scenario that only a handful of people have access to, you use that money to buy 1 million shares in a new startup company for just a fraction of a penny per share. A few years later, that company goes public and the value of its share rises to $50. Holy crap. Now, your Roth IRA is worth $50 million. Normally, when you sell those shares, you would owe the IRS 20% of your gains, which is a capital gains tax. But since this all happened inside a Roth IRA, you don't pay any taxes. So $1,000 becomes $50 million with something going to an IPO. Next, you use that $50 million to invest in more companies. Yep, that's where it goes. When those companies go public or their stock increases in value, your Roth IRA keeps growing. Okay, so you use that $1,000 and he had this special deal to buy stock for pennies on a dollar, and then they go IPO. So if you can keep getting those deals on these special companies for pennies on the dollar, that can have his wealth grow exponentially. I guess, like they say, right? It takes money to make money. And when you've got it, it can come easy. When those companies go public or their stock increases in value, your Roth IRA keeps growing. As long as you wait to cash out until you're 59 and a half years old, that money will never be taxed. The ultra-wealthy's hijacking of a tool meant for the middle class becomes especially striking when you consider what the retirement future looks like for many Americans. There isn't one. 1 in 4 working-age Americans has nothing saved for retirement, the 2020 Federal Reserve study found. Individual retirement accounts emerged from the ruins of corporate pensions. The traditional IRA had existed since the 1970s for workers who didn't have pensions, but as corporations shifted the burden of saving for retirement to workers, too few Americans were setting up these accounts, condemning many to scrape by on Social Security in old age. By the 1990s, politicians on both sides of the aisle were fretting over the declining savings rates in the U.S. Yep, but it's not going to get any better. Minimum wage hasn't gone up. Inequality is higher. It's just going to get worse and worse. Social Security is laughable for how much it gives you. It was against this backdrop that an idea Senator Roth had been pushing for years finally found its moment. One of the fathers of Reaganomics, Roth, was determined to slash the federal budget, cut taxes, and rein in the IRS. Starting in 1987, as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, Roth held a series of hearings that portrayed IRS agents as menacing thugs. Roth's investigation sparked legislation that gutted the IRS's collective powers for more than a decade. But it was his championing of the Roth IRA that would earn the senator posthumous fame and a mention in the American Heritage Dictionary. Roth's obsession with the new kind of IRA, which he said would be a blessing to countless Americans as they prepare for the future. It would also create an escape hatch from the entire income tax system. Yeah, this is, if I actually had extra money, this is something I would be setting up for my wife and I. I'm setting up a Roth IRA instead of a standard IRA, just because of all this. But again, it takes money to do that. Run-of-the-mill retirement plans, a traditional IRA or 401k, for instance, defer taxes to a later date. The money that people put into their accounts is deducted from their income, so they aren't taxed up front, nor are the dividends, interest, or gains on investments along the way. But when retirees withdraw money, they have to pay income tax on it. A Roth, by contrast, eliminates tax liability rather than deferring it. People who open a Roth don't get the tax break on the money they initially put in, but once they deposit that money, their investments grow tax-free forever, and retirees don't pay a penny of taxes on withdrawals. Even better, unlike a traditional IRA, the Roth doesn't require retirees to deplete the account as they age. Yeah, so this just sounds... Roth IRAs are really good for us, if you have money. Senator Roth promised that his new IRA would provide relief to hardworking middle-class Americans. But of course, he's one of the fathers of Reaganomics, so he destroyed everyone's life so that they couldn't take advantage of it. You fucker. The law creating the Roth IRA passed in 1997 with overwhelming bipartisan support. A few tax wonks predicted that workers who were most likely to struggle financially in old age wouldn't open the accounts because they couldn't afford to save. Roths, they warned, would become a giveaway to mostly well-off taxpayers who would have saved anyway. Investing in a Roth was like locking in a rate on a mortgage, where when interest rates were low, an attractive position for wealthy Americans worried that Congress would raise taxes in the future years. That's why the Clinton administration insisted on barring people who made too much from stashing money in a Roth. Surely that would prevent super rich from gaming the system to use Roths as tax shelters. Well, here we go. Let's see. Peter Thiel opens a Roth in 1999. Here's how his account grows compared to a Roth with maxed out annual contributions invested in the Standard & Poor's 500. Okay, so $2,000. It's down here in the corner. If you can see it here. All right, 1999. Oh my God. Okay, so Roth IRA, and then the Standard & Poor's right below it in yellow. Okay, in 1 year, it jumps to $50,000, whereas the Roth is $2,000. Wait, hold on. Oh my God, in 1 year. Okay, so 1 year, it's worth $3,785,000, and then the investment into an S&P 500 stock fund is just $4,000. That's an incredible increase. All right, let's go ahead and read what they're talking about here. One day in early 1999, a deputy of Thiel's at the company that would become PayPal walked into the San Francisco office of Pensco Pension Services. It would have been an uneventful appointment. Instead, it changed Thiel's life. Thiel, a Stanford Law graduate, ran a small hedge fund that hadn't yet joined the ranks of the ultra-wealthy. But he had outsized ambitions for his months-old tech venture, where he served as both chairman and CEO. He envisioned his company creating a new world currency free from all government control. Okay, interesting. Influenced by libertarian Ayn Rand, of course, in Tolkien's fantasy trilogy, Thiel, then in his early 30s, carried himself like a contrarian philosopher king. A few years earlier, he had co-authored a Jeremiad against multiculturalism that accused the administration of the then President Bill Clinton of waging class warfare. Taxing the rich seems to have become an end in itself, he and his co-author wrote. Yeah, that's exactly, it's tax the fucking rich. That's what we need to be doing here. Just because we can. Pensco was a small firm that allowed its customers to put nearly any investment they wanted into a tax-advantaged retirement account. Thiel was about to become Pensco's whale. In an interview with ProPublica, Pensco founder Tom Anderson recalled how Thiel and other PayPal executives had wanted to put startup shares of the company into traditional IRAs. Anderson dangled something sweeter. I said, if you really think it's going to be big, you might want to consider this new Roth, recalled Anderson, who is now retired. If the investment ballooned, he remembered saying you're not going to pay tax on it when you take it out. It's a no-brainer. The math was compelling. Thiel wouldn't get a tax break up front, but he'd avoid an immense tax bill later on if the investment surged in value. They immediately grasped that, Anderson said, and they did it. What happened next deprived the U.S. government of untold millions in tax revenue, perhaps billions. Thiel used his new Roth IRA to purchase shares of his startup. In 1999, single taxpayers were only allowed to contribute to a Roth if they made less than $110,000. Like many startups, PayPal offered its top executives low initial salaries and large stock grants. Thiel's income that year was $73,000, the IRS records show. Thiel also had an advantage over most Americans with IRAs, who typically use them to purchase publicly traded stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and certificates of deposit. Since Thiel used his Roth to buy shares of a private company, the value wasn't set on public stock exchange. Though the details of such purchases are not usually public, Thiel's financial assistant later disclosed them in a letter included in the entrepreneur's application for residency in New Zealand. Mr. Thiel purchased his founder shares in PayPal through his Roth IRA during PayPal's formation. While SEC filings describing that time don't mention Thiel's Roth, they show that he bought his first slice of the company in January 1999. Thiel paid 0.001 cents per share. Yes, that's a tenth of a penny for 1.7 million shares. At that price, he was able to buy a large stake for just $1,700. $1,999, $2,000 was the maximum you could put into a Roth in a year. Thiel's unusual stock purchase risked running afoul of rules designed to prevent IRAs from becoming illegal tax shelters. Investors aren't allowed to buy assets for less than their true value through an IRA. The practice is sometimes known as stuffing because it gets around the strict limits imposed by Congress on how much money they can put in a Roth. Okay. PayPal later disclosed details about the early history of the company in an SEC filing before its initial public offering. The filing reveals that Thiel's founder shares were among those the company sold to employees at below fair value. Jazz Bay, how you doing? Welcome. I'm reading an article on Peter Thiel's massive wealth found in a Roth IRA. How you doing today? PayPal later disclosed details about, okay, we read that. Victor Fleischer, a tax law professor at the University of California, Irvine, who has written about the valuation of founder shares, read the PayPal's filings at ProPublica's request. Buying startup shares at a discounted price with a Roth, he asserts, would be indefensible. That's a huge scandal, Fleischer said, adding, how greedy can you get? Well, there you go. Warren Baker, a Seattle tax attorney who specializes in IRAs, said he would advise clients who are top executives working at a startup not to purchase founder shares with a Roth to avoid accusations by the IRS that they got a special deal and undervalued the shares. Baker was speaking generally, not about Thiel. I would be concerned about the fact that you can't support the valuation number as being reasonable, he said. At the time Thiel bought his founder shares, his own hedge fund had already loaned the new startup $100,000. California and SEC records show. So here we've got 2004, 34 million is Thiel's Roth, and then a standard Roth with S&P 500 is worth $14,000 at putting what the max in. You haven't heard about this? Yeah, this just came out this week. Here's the article for you. ProPublica, they've got, this is a giant ass article on it. This is probably gonna be the first hour of reading or more. It's pretty crazy. Yeah, he's got like $5 billion in his Roth IRA. It's just mind-boggling. And soon after the company sold him the shares, millions of dollars poured in from investors. Securities filings show. In just a month's time, the company sold a slice of itself to investors for $500,000. In that June and August, another $4.5 million poured in from the venture fund arm of telecom giant Nokia and other investors. Those records show. Dot-com boom was in full swing. We're definitely onto something big, Thiel told employees in late 1999. Predicting that PayPal would become the Microsoft of payments, according to the PayPal Wars, a book by a former employee recounting those heady early years. But when it came time for Pensko, the custodian of Thiel's Roth, to report the value of the account to the IRS at the close of 1999, none of the investors' enthusiasm was apparent. Pensko told the IRS that Thiel's Roth was worth just $1,664. at the end of 1999. In an interview, Anderson said Penske relied on the companies whose shares were in a Roth to say what they were worth. He didn't know how PayPal came up with its market value, but he said Thiel's purchase of those shares was very legitimate. From there, nothing would stop Thiel's Roth. In a Silicon Valley equivalent of Tolkien alchemy, his Roth would transform those PayPal shares into a tax-free fortune, one that would be safer than all the gems, gold, and silver in the Dragon Smog's mountain. By 2005, it's worth $51 million after starting it in 1999. And if they just invested standard into a Standards & Poor 500 portfolio, it'd be worth $20,000. After 1999, Thiel would never again contribute money to his Roth, the records show. He didn't need to. In just a year's time, the value of his Roth jumped from $1,664 to $3.8 million, a 227,490% increase. Then in 2002, eBay purchased PayPal. That same year, Thiel sold the shares still inside his Roth. His financial assistant later told New Zealand officials the tax-free proceeds poured into his account. By the end of 2002, Thiel's Roth was worth $28.5 million. In 2006, his Roth is worth $65 million. Standard investment, a Roth IRA would be worth $25,000. If he had held his shares outside the Roth in a normal investment account, Thiel would have owed the IRS 20% of his gains and owed another 9% to California tax authorities. Because if the shares were in a Roth, he had no tax bill when he sold them, saving him millions. Suddenly, Thiel had an advantage few investors could claim: his own personal investment bank that wasn't subject to taxation. He could now use the cash inside the Roth to buy and sell nearly any investment he wanted. Thiel used the millions in proceeds from his PayPal windfall to invest in other Silicon Valley startups as well as his own hedge fund. According to his financial assistant's memo, once again Thiel's Roth scooped up starting shares at bargain basement prices. For instance, Thiel and colleagues in 2003 founded Palantir, a data analytics company, helped by an early investment from a CIA-backed venture fund. The company was named after the seeing stones made by elves in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, used to detect danger near and far. Thiel used his Roth to buy shares of Palantir when it was still a private company, years before it was listed on the New York Stock Exchange, according to a ProPublica analysis of tax records, an SEC filing, and shareholder records, including in a civil suit. Over the years, Palantir has won federal contracts for the military to hunt terrorists, and from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to find undocumented immigrants. Even the IRS has a $99 million contract with Palantir to comb through data to identify tax cheaters. Oh, isn't that just fucking rich? Then in 2004, Thiel met Mark Zuckerberg, a Harvard graduate, who had come to Silicon Valley for the summer to work on growing the company that would become Facebook. Thiel invested $500,000. Facebook's first large outside infusion of cash. Those Facebook shares ended up where else? In Thiel's Roth IRA. An attorney for Facebook later disclosed in a letter filed in federal court. That ensured that Thiel wouldn't owe taxes on his early investment in the company. See, when you have money, you can make money. That's the big thing. And this is why inequality is so devastating, because we don't have the money to invest and do things like this. 2007, his Roth is worth $839 million versus the $35,000 for a standard Roth IRA. As Thiel's Roth and fortune ballooned, he scolded Americans for their financial imprudence. In a 2006 Forbes column headlined, "Warning, save, save, save." Thiel lamented the low household savings in the United States and called for most Americans to live within their means. Forgo the new kitchen and sun deck, he wrote. Shoot to put away 15% of the paycheck. His closing advice: live modestly, and saving well is better than dying broke. So says the rich man. In an interview on the website Big Think, Thiel said the U.S. tax system has fairness problems, in which you have super rich people paying a lower rate than people in the middle or upper class. No shit, Sherlock. The Answer wasn't taxing the rich more, he said, but taxing the middle class and upper class a lot less and cutting their dependence on expensive programs such as Medicare and Social Security. Nope. The answer is tax the shit out of the rich until they are middle class. Universal health care. Progressive basic income. High minimum wage. High maximum wage. There you go. By then, Thiel had purchased a Ferrari and had bought and sold a penthouse in the San Francisco Four Seasons. In 2005, he sought residency in New Zealand, which had become a destination for some ultra-wealthy people who saw it as a safe haven should civilization collapse. I've long admired the people, culture, business environment, and government of New Zealand, as well as the encouragement which is given to investment business. All right, just a second. The wife again. All right, sorry. Which is given to investment, business, and trade in New Zealand. Thiel later wrote in a letter to the country's government. Thiel applied as an investor. His application, prepared by his then financial assistant, Jason Portnoy, touted the size of his Roth. Thiel transferred $749,967 to a bank in New Zealand, keeping it under the umbrella of the Roth. The country where the Lord of the Rings movies were filmed approved Thiel's application. The New Zealand Herald later revealed that the country had secretly granted Thiel full citizenship. The newspaper obtained Thiel's application through a public records request, and those documents included Portnoy's letter. In the next 2 years, Thiel's Roth reached new heights, reflecting Facebook's meteoric rise. In his best-selling book on startups, 0 to 1, Thiel wrote, "Money makes money." By the end of 2008, the Roth was worth $870 million. Up to this point, Thiel was one of the few Americans who had managed to amass prodigious Roth accounts. Among the others were at least 3 additional PayPal alums who eventually built Roths worth more than $80 million each, according to tax records and SEC filings. Even so, the existing income limits managed to keep most of the super rich out. Then, in the later years of the George W. Bush administration, Congress took a wrecking ball to those defenses, and the wealthy stormed in. The change centered on an unsexy-sounding maneuver known as a Roth conversion. It works like this. If you have money in a traditional IRA, you can transform it into a Roth as long as you pay a one-time income tax on the money. Okay, fair. By converting the account to a Roth, no additional income taxes were ever due. Okay, yep. Conversions had existed since Roth's conception, but they had been restricted to Americans making below $100,000 per year. Okay. In 2006, Bush and the Republican-controlled Congress were seeking to slash taxes on capital gains, the type of income that can be generated when stocks or other assets are sold. But they faced a problem. Budget rules required them to find a way to make up for the lost revenue. Their solution was widely viewed as a gimmick, using one tax cut to pay for another tax cut. Provision was included in the Bush bill that lifted the ban on the wealthy making Roth conversions. Since the maneuver requires a payment of tax up front, it counted in short-term congressional budget models as actually raising revenue. Tax breaks didn't come until later. It will have large and damaging effects on the federal budget for decades to come, wrote budget expert Len Berman in the specialty publication Tax Notes. The new backdoor into the Roth opened in 2010 and set off a frenzy of conversions among hedge fund managers, industrialists, and heirs, the tax records reviewed by ProPublica show. Weschler, the Berkshire Hathaway executive, amassed a giant traditional IRA in his years as a private equity partner and hedge fund manager. He converted a whopping $130 million. His boss, Warren Buffett, converted $11.6 million. After paying a one-time tax, both men saw their Roth accounts soar. By 2011, Thiel's Roth is worth $1.3 billion, and traditional IRA is worth $54,000. In a statement, Weschler said he opened a retirement account as a 22-year-old junior financial analyst in 1983 and began contributing the maximum amount allowed, along with a generous match from his employer. Weschler said his Roth is so large because he chose investments carefully, had exceptional luck, and had nearly 4 decades for it to grow. Weschler said he could envision the late Senator Roth holding up his experience as an aspirational example of the power of deferred consumption that could hopefully help motivate generations of future savers. He added that he paid more than $28 million in federal taxes to convert his Roth account. Some of the wealthy managed to avoid even that one-time tax bill. 3 members of the Ebrahimi family, whose patriarch made a fortune at the software firm Quark, collectively converted $65 million into Roths in 2010 and 2011. Farhad Ebrahimi, one of the heirs of the fortune, had supported left-wing causes and became known for walking around the Occupy Boston protest in 2011 wearing a hand-lettered t-shirt that declared he was a member of the 1% and said, "Tax me, I'm good for it." Kind of. He converted $19.4 million into a Roth, which would have triggered $6.8 million in income tax. But thanks to losses generated by other investments, he wiped out the tax bill on the conversion. Ebrahimi declined to comment. Well, that's kind of the way the game is played. In 2009, word of Thiel's secret weapon leaked for the first time in a historic headline, "Give me liberty or give me taxpayer money." Gawker Media, citing anonymous sources, revealed that Thiel held his Facebook investment in a tax-free Roth. The Great Recession, though, caught up with Thiel. His hedge fund racked up big losses. Thiel then did something unusual. For 5 years, starting in 2010, he dipped into his Roth IRA for at least $254 million. The IRS returned data obtained by ProPublica shows. This is almost unheard of among wealthy, tax advisors say, because it shrinks the pot of the money that can be invested tax-free. Because Thiel was still in his 40s, he was too young to pull money from a Roth without paying income tax plus a 10% penalty on these withdrawals. So that's a huge amount of tax. During the life of his Roth, Thiel also made money outside it. He took in an additional $687 million of income in 1999 to 2018, largely from gains on investments. All told, over that period, he paid $206 million in federal taxes, including the taxes on the early Roth withdrawals. For those years, however, Thiel managed to cut his federal income tax bill to zero. In 2011, Thiel caught the attention of the IRS. The agency launched an audit tax. The records don't spell out what the IRS was looking for or if it involved Thiel's Roth. Whatever the case, the audit was closed years later, and Thiel didn't owe any more taxes. By 2012, large IRAs began to attract scrutiny, falling under the Klieg lights of presidential politics. That January, the Wall Street Journal reported that Mitt Romney, the former private equity executive running for the GOP nomination, had listed on a financial disclosure form that he had amassed an IRA worth between $20 million and $102 million. The story ran on the front page and launched waves of coverage in other publications. Romney had a traditional IRA, not a Roth. But how people wondered, could the account have grown so large, given that the government imposed strict limits on how much money could be put into one of the tax-deferred accounts. Citing former company insiders and documents, the Journal reported that Romney's time as CEO at investments giant Bain Capital, executives there had effectively bypassed the contribution limits by putting extremely low-valued shares from private equity deals into their IRAs, then watching them balloon. There you go. ProPublica's analysis of the tax records showed that by the end of 2018, at least 7 other current and former Bain executives had amassed IRAs worth $25 million or more, with 3 exceeding $90 million. Other financiers also found ways to supersize their retirement accounts. Oh, thank you so much for the follow. Contra-member. Yeah, we're just covering some the Peter Thiel article on Roth IRAs from ProPublica, which just came out fairly recently. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Michael Milken, for example, the 1980s junk bond king who went to prison for fraud and was later pardoned by presidential Donald Trump, had traditional IRAs valued at $509 million. A senior advisor to Milken declined to answer questions since it's not our practice to publish or discuss Mike Milken's private financial information. I can help you on this one. Romney lost the 2012 election, but the IRA revelation provoked a lasting backlash. Wyden asked the investigative arm of Congress to look into the matter. In a landmark report issued in 2014, the Government Accountability Office sounded the alarm, finding the mega IRA stood in contrast to Congress's aim. IRS officials told investigators that the federal government was losing more and more money to IRA abuses. The Government Accountability Office investigators flagged aggressive valuation tactics by private equity. And while it didn't mention Thiel or his PayPal co-founders, the report laid out how startup founders' shares could be used to render IRA contribution limits irrelevant. Individuals can manipulate contribution limits by grossly undervaluing investments at the time the individual uses an IRA to purchase them, the congressional investigators wrote. All right, 2016, IRA is worth $1.8 billion from Thiel's Roth, and then normal contribution limits and interest rates or rates of return from S&P 500 were at $142,000. The report estimated that as of 2011, there were around 300 taxpayers with IRAs worth more than $25 million. That detail reverberated around the media and Capitol Hill. Few knew that most of those accounts were minuscule compared to Thiel's, which that year was valued at nearly $1.6 billion. A series of reform proposals followed. Wyden, who now holds Roth's old position as chair of the Senate Finance Committee, has become the leading proponent of rolling back what he calls unfair strategies used by the privileges to rake in subsidies and dodge tax bills with so-called mega Roth IRAs. In 2016, he released a plan that would require owners of Roth IRAs worth more than $5 million to take money out of the accounts. Amid howls of protest from the retirement industry and a Senate and House controlled by Republicans, Wyden's proposal went nowhere. Okay, $5 million invested is a good amount. The IRS, meanwhile, was floundering in its efforts to police retirement accounts. At one point, the agency recommended Congress prohibit IRA accounts from buying investments that aren't traded on a public market. Okay, makes sense. Such as founder shares. That went nowhere too. Instead, Congress began slashing the IRS's budget, kneecapping the agency for more than a decade. Yeah, there we go. In 2009, an internal team had recommended the agency at least collect data on unorthodox assets held in IRAs, but it took more than 5 years for the agency to mandate disclosure of those investments. Even then, the agency simply required tax forms to say whether an IRA held stock in a private company, not the name of the company or the price per share. Why wouldn't you have that information? Ugh. By 2015, the agency was struggling to handle the paper forms sent in by the companies that administer IRAs. The agency couldn't afford to digitize them. Another 2 years went by before the IRS started electronically transcribing forms. Yeah, this is what they should have been working on in the first place. Electronic submission things so that they can get all the data they want without having to deal with the paperwork. After years of plotting, the agency said it was finally ready in 2019 to use the data to target potential abusers for audits. And that's before the real fighting begins over hotly contested issues such as how to value shares in a startup that aren't publicly traded. IRS officials have complained to the congressional investigators that challenging such valuations is costly and time-consuming, and that it requires a small army of experts to go up against the deep-pocketed taxpayers. The IRS did not respond to the detailed questions, but as ProPublica has reported, in tax disputes with the rich, the IRS is completely outmatched. So they could put founders' shares into a standard IRA, and then once they become public, maybe let's say after they go IPO, maybe a year after, maybe then you can shift it over to a Roth IRA. That would be one way to deal with it. In his book, 0 to 1, Thiel argues that fortunes are built not by luck or unfair advantage, fucking bullshit, but by discerning investors and founders who are more courageous than their peers. Leaders who zig when the crowd zags. Thiel devotes an entire chapter on the importance of keeping secrets, writing that every great business is built around a secret that's hidden from the outside. Proprietary stuff, right? Secret of Thiel's is that his fortune was built not just with brains, but also with massive tax breaks. By 2019, Thiel's holdings had grown so vast and diverse that his $5 billion was spread across 96 sub-accounts inside his Roth. As his wealth grew, Thiel showered millions of dollars on Republican politicians and groups with an anti-tax agenda, including Club for Growth Action. In 2016, he became the rare Silicon Valley titan to endorse Donald Trump. And of course he did. In 2019, his Roth is worth $4.5 billion, whereas the standard return on investment and investment limits, the standard IRA is worth $217,000. The Trump years, which fueled a market boom, were good for Thiel and his Roth. In 2018, he moved his Roth from Pensko to Rivendell, the family trust company named after Tolkien's elven sanctuary. Tolkien's fantasy world, elves can be killed in battle or succumb to grief, but they don't die of old age or disease. Thiel has told people he hopes to live to be 120 years old. That might be a bit optimistic, but he's not taking any chances and is investing in anti-aging technology companies. He even tucked some of those shares into his Roth, SEC and tax records show. Assuming a modest 6% annual return and no withdrawals, his tax-free golden egg could be worth $263 billion in 2087, when Thiel plans to celebrate his 120th birthday. That's larger than the current gross domestic product of New Zealand, his adopted homeland. So maybe he could just buy New Zealand. I mean, you know what? Greenland wouldn't sell itself to, Trump. Maybe New Zealand would. There's good news and bad news, Thiel told the Washington Post when asked about living more than a century. The bad news is, if you don't believe in the good news, you're not saving enough for retirement and likely to spend much of your old age in poverty. The financial planning, Thiel said, takes on a very different character. Okay, there we go. There is the ProPublica article. It was long. We have taken an hour to read it, like I said. Questions, comments, suggestions, thoughts? Now, don't get me wrong. What he did was smart. It's probably abuse of the system by using, founder shares, which he probably should not have done, and it really probably wasn't that legal. But, I mean, if you got the money, if you're going to do that, it's smart to do. Obviously, the system allows you to do it, which is fundamentally problematic, and reforming it, of course, is going to be very difficult because the 1% controls the government. Sons of bitches. All right. Moving on. I need a drink. I have to recover from reading that. Uh-oh. My chat just logged out. Hold on. Wait, hold on. What is going on? Okay, now everything, come on. Everything minimized. Why did you minimize? All right, there we go. All right, so yeah, questions, comments, suggestions on this article before we move on. It's over here. Here we go. Yeah. All right. So we'll move on. It's from Democracy Now! Dozens of youth climate activists arrested at White House demanding action on climate crisis. This is just from today. In Washington, D.C., hundreds of youth climate activists surrounded the White House Monday in a nonviolent blockade demanding President Biden take meaningful action on the climate crisis. Secret Service agents made dozens of arrests. Why the fuck would the Secret Service be involved in this? Members of the Sunrise Movement are calling on Biden and congressional Democrats to pass an infrastructure bill that includes major investment in green energy, including a fully funded civilian climate corps. Joining the protest was New York Democratic Congressmember Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who said there was no time to waste in preventing climate catastrophe. Yeah. Representative AOC, what a lot of folks here in DC don't understand is that while this may be the hottest summer of their lives, it's going to be one of the coolest summers of our lives. And so what that means is that they brought this heat to us, so we're bringing the heat to them. All right, so that was the thing. For some reason, I don't have no clue why the Secret Service got involved in arresting them. I mean, that's just ridiculous. But that happened. Here's a picture from it. We need more of this going on because what Congress is doing, well, what they're not doing is horrific. All right. Next. Here's about George Floyd. UN calls on nations to end untenable status quo of systemic racism. A report commissioned after the killing of George Floyd pointed to the impunity with which police violate the human rights of people of African descent all over the world. In a report that was commissioned following the police killing of George Floyd and released Monday, United Nations human rights officials say the impunity of police officers all over the world has led to persistent discrimination against black people in the criminal justice system, noting that policymakers must confront the interconnected areas that drive racism and lead to repeated, wholly avoidable tragedies. Yeah, and then we've covered this before a little bit, right, with the Kerner report from 1968 following the 1967 riots, that quote, long hot summer. I mean, there have been many government reports in the last, 100 years or whatever that have basically said all the same thing. Americans need to stop being racist and reduce inequality. And we know what needs to be done. The defund the police movement is a good example of that. Start shifting money away from the police and into social services, healthcare, education, jobs, minimum wage, and all that sort of things. And of course, that will, as equality goes up, as you lift poverty, then crime goes down and police aren't needed. I've got that whole post. Actually, I'll go and bring this up. My whole post there on defund the police, where I talk about that exact thing. I'll go ahead and throw that in here so you can take a look at it. We need a transformative approach, said UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Michelle Bachelet. I'm calling on all states to stop denying and start dismantling racism. Now, the problem with saying that, I mean, it's good to say, and it's very good, thing to do. But the problem is that in order to dismantle racism, you have to dismantle capitalism. And of course, the people who own our governments aren't going to be down with that because they lose their power and their luxury. And this person, it's all good that she says that, but she also needs to say what is kind of the core of it: capitalism. UN Human Rights Chief urges immediate urges immediate transformative action to uproot systemic racism in new report casting a spotlight on violations of economic, social, cultural, civil, and political rights by people of African descent. Okay, good. Officials began working on the study a year ago as racial justice protests spread from Minneapolis, where Floyd was killed by former police officer Derek Chauvin, to the rest of the United States and dozens of other countries. People of African descent face interconnected and compounded forms of racial discrimination, marginalization, and exclusion that are shaped by historical legacies and mutually reinforced through cycles of structural inequalities that have lasted for generations. Okay, that's a true statement. True statement. Floyd's killing was one of 7 in-depth case studies the experts included in the report, which discussed a total of 190 police killings. Most of the incidents took place in the U.S., but the case studies also included the deaths of Luana Barbosa, José Santos, and João Pedro Matos Pinto. In Brazil, Kevin Clark in the UK, Janer Garcia Palomino in Colombia, and Adama Traoré in France. The report comes days after Chauvin was sentenced to 22.5 years in prison for the killing of Floyd, but accountability was found to be rarity in cases of black people's human rights being violated around the world. With the exception of the case of George Floyd, no one was held accountable. Mona Rishmawi, chief of the Rule of Law, Equity, and Non-Discrimination Branch of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, it's a mouthful, told reporters. After interviewing 340 people, including human rights experts and family members of victims, the OHCHR identified 3 contexts underlying more than 85% of police killings all over the world. The policing of minor offenses and traffic stops, which disproportionately affect people of African descent, the use of police departments in responses to mental health crisis, and the conduct of special operations forces. Oh yeah, okay, so what we have here is, we're talking about defund the police, and this is exactly what we're talking about. So you're saying these are the problems, and these are the sorts of problems that defunding the police is looking to end, right? Minor offenses and traffic stops, you can have civilians do that. Some, like Minneapolis or some other places, looking at doing that. Use of police department to handle mental crises, you should send social workers and healthcare workers to do that, right? And demilitarize the police. Those are all part of my policies. These are my policies, right? And these are all a part of the defund the police thing. José Santos, a 34-year-old Afro-Brazilian woman, was pursued by the police on the suspicion that she was riding a stolen motorcycle. Clark died in police custody in South London after being restrained by police, who arrived when he showed signs of a relapse of his mental illness. And Garcia Palomino was allegedly shot last year when the Colombian National Police responded to a fight between rival gangs in his neighborhood. Human rights violations of people of African descent by police officers were what spurred the OHCHR to compile the report last year, but the officials also cataloged the stark socioeconomic marginalization shapes the lives of people of African descent in many states and regions. Again, systemic and structural racism, it is a thing, and it is devastating. The report noted that people of African descent in Latin America were more than 2.5 times more likely to live in chronic poverty, and that even in countries with small black populations such as Saudi Arabia, people of African descent faced discrimination in access to housing, education, healthcare, and employment, as well as societal racism. The report also pointed to environmental racism, racial prejudices, and stereotypes by healthcare providers and other structural barriers to obtain adequate healthcare, and housing discrimination as examples of systemic racism that affect people of African descent around the world. The submissions and consultations highlighted that people of African descent face interconnected and compounded forms of racial discrimination, marginalization, and exclusion that are shaped by historical legacies and mutually reinforced through cycles of structural inequalities that have lasted for generations, the report reads. Yeah, the harms of systemic and structural racism as it carries on and creates intergenerational, or prevents the accumulation of intergenerational wealth. That makes it very difficult for anyone to get out of poverty. And we read that one post last week on that very topic. Rishmawi said the OHCHR could not find a single example of a state that has fully reckoned with the past or comprehensively accounted for the impacts of the lives of people of African descent today. Our message, therefore, is that this situation is untenable, she said. Regarding the police killings of black people in the US and elsewhere, Bachelet said delivering justice will involve reimagining policing and reforming criminal justice systems, which have consistently produced discriminatory outcomes for people of African descent. Yeah, there is that too. And that's, when we've talked about this before, a concept I had for dealing with that issue in courts is you can have you keep the identifying information out of the court, keep it away from the judge, keep it away from the jury and the bailiff and all that sort of stuff, so that you don't see their face, you don't hear their voice, you don't know where what they're from. You do everything you can to limit the socioeconomic, ethnic identification of the person. That if they need to speak, then either it'll be heavily modified, or specifically you'll have someone else who will speak for them, who repeat what they say. That way you can't try and figure out what race this person is by virtue of their accent or how they speak or anything like that. So the more you can purge socioethnic identifiers from the person, the more likely you are to get a more just justice system. And the differences between white and black and people of color should be able to go down. Now, I don't think this is really that tenable as a concept, but it might be. Okay, the report quotes the mother of Kevin Clark, who told the OHCHR that in addition to changing the perception and response to black people by the police, we want mental health services better funded so that the first point of response is not just reliant on the police. Yep. And again, here in the United States, universal health care is required, and that should include, chiropractic and mental health, dental as well. Echoing calls in the U.S., which have gained traction in the past year to end police interventions in mental health crisis and instead increase funding for community services. Yep. There is an overarching need to heed these calls to reimagine policing and the criminal justice system for human rights perspective by supporting and implementing community-driven models that protect and serve all members of communities without discrimination. The end of impunity with which police officers have killed countless people of African descent. The officials called for effective, impartial, and timely investigations of allegations of unlawful use of force and other violations by law enforcement officials, with a specific focus on the possible role that racial discrimination may have played in the violation, imposing commensurate punishments, and providing guarantees of non-repetition. So yeah, one of the things, I don't know if I have this in my policies. Obviously, they're gonna have to wear body cameras and also get rid of the immunity aspect, and also their records. I think I have that in here. Have their records public or publicly available. I'll have to take a look at that. I've got a bug in the house. Oh. Okay, I don't have that in here. I have to look that up. All right. There is today a momentous opportunity to achieve a turning point for racial equality and justice. The OHCHR said Africans and people of African descent, like all human beings, are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Drawing upon the international obligations and commitments, states must show stronger political will to accelerate action for racial justice and equality. Okay, these are all good words. I like what they have to say here. However, of course, the UN isn't at all binding. And one of the complaints about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for me, is that it wasn't a binding thing. It needs to be binding. So, just to end systemic and structural racism, you need to end inequality. It's pretty much that. It's that simple. It's hard to do that within capitalism. Questions, comments, suggestions on that? I drove most everyone away with the ProPublica one. All right, because that was really long. All right, so this one is from. It's from last year. No, so this is from yesterday. Biden EPA lining up with chemical industry against push to curb microplastics. While you might expect Trump's EPA to align with the oil and chemical industry against protections for the American people from potentially harmful plastic chemicals, the Biden administration must do better. Must, but they won't. A Greenpeace investigation revealed Monday that the Biden administration appears sympathetic to oil and chemical industry giants, not the public, scientists, and public health advocates regarding a push in Europe to curb the use of microplastics in everyday products. According to a report by Unearthed, Greenpeace, UK's investigative journalism unit, a senior policy advisor at the Environmental Protection Agency named Carissa Kovner, exchanged emails with the American Chemical Council in April 2019 regarding a proposal by the Swiss government to list microplastics UV328 in the Stockholm Convention, the UN's global treaty on chemicals that don't easily break down in nature. Okay. As much of the world works to take action to address the impacts of the plastic pollution crisis, the U.S. government should be stepping forward to lead, not echoing the world's worst polluters. Yeah, and that's much of what you hear me say in on this channel, right? That so much could be changed if the United States would stop becoming the largest terrorist organization in the world and be the vanguard of global change. We could radically change the world, right? As Buckminster Fuller says, paraphrased here, if we start shifting our research and putting our money in, shifting it from weaponry into livingry. If United, like dropping the, reducing the military budget by 75%, shifting that to, Green New Deal sort of stuff, a civilian climate corps, federal jobs guarantee, going to sustainable energy, infrastructure, all sorts of things like that. I mean, we could be the very beginning of all of, we could be, the United States acting to save humanity from extinction could be that linchpin, that clarion call that gets the rest of the world in line. The United States has that much power, richest country in the world, largest military, we could do that. But we're not going to. UV328's inclusion in the treaty would lead to a ban on its production and use, which is currently common in plastic products, rubber, paints, coatings, and cosmetics, said Unearthed. ACC officials forwarded an email to Kovner about the proposal, to which she said, wow, that's quite a precedent. Holy moly. The ACC then told Kovner the Swiss government's push is the first concrete proposal to label UV328 as a persistent organic pollutant. Pop. Welcome to our future, Kovner said. Kovner's comments were made when she was serving under former President Donald Trump, but she appears to still be leading the EPA's work on chemicals under Biden. In late March, she represented the EPA as senior policy advisor for international affairs at the ACC's Global Chem Conference. While you might expect Trump's EPA to align with the oil and chemical industry against protections for the American people from potentially harmful plastic chemicals, the Biden administration must do better, said John Hakavar, Greenpeace USA Oceans Campaign Director. As much of the world works to take action to address the impacts of the plastic pollution crisis, the U.S. government should be stepping forward to lead, not echoing the world's worst polluters. Did I just repeat that? I might have. The microplastics that Kovner, the ACC, and the European Chemical Industry Council expressed concern about regulating has been classified as a substance of very high concern because it persists in the environment and accumulates in organisms. Yeah, this is one of the big issues, that fish are eating it, thinking it's food. I mean, there have been, fish that have been found washed up on shore just filled with microplastics and plastics in general, like whales dying because all they have in their bellies are plastics. Microplastics have been detected in oceans, birds' eggs, minks' vital organs in the Arctic, sparking fear among indigenous communities that it could affect them as well. Raindrops, household items, and human breast milk. We are no longer just poisoning the environment with our waste. We are poisoning ourselves. This, or more than a solid waste or ocean pollution crisis, it is now an environmental justice, international human rights, climate, and public health issue. Scientists say more research is needed to determine UV328's effect on human health, but may have raised concerns about its persistence in the environment. The assumption is that if a chemical doesn't degrade, we are altering our environment in a permanent way, and we shouldn't be doing that, said Laura Vandenberg, professor at University of Massachusetts Amherst. When we start finding chemicals in human breast milk, it's not good. It means that it's going into babies during vulnerable developmental periods. Now, again, it's not just whether or not it degrades. It's how it degrades. If you have a plastic and it degrades quickly, within 100 days or something like that, is that just putting plastic and oils and chemicals into the water and into the ground, right? That's almost worse than just having a single microplastic, when you have it all spread out in the plants and the animals and that sort of stuff. So it's not just that we don't just want it to degrade. We want it to degrade in a way that is, or shall we say, organic and not bad for anyone or anything. That's the key thing. Although the European Chemicals Agency concluded in 2014 that UV328 meets its toxicity criteria and that long-term exposure can have impacts on vital organs, including the liver or kidneys, chemical trades groups have argued that pollution linked to the microplastics may have come from other sources and that there has not been sufficient rate of transfer to remote areas. Kovner said last year that the EPA and chemical trade groups felt differently than many scientists regarding long-range transport of UV328. One of 5 criteria showing a chemical qualifies as a POP and should be listed in the Stockholm Convention. The EPA official was echoing a claim made by Cefic in April 2019 when argued at length to the ECHA that long-range transport of UV328 has not been proven and that the microplastics should not be banned without such proof. Well, it shouldn't be, honestly, it shouldn't be just about what is the microplastic made of. It should be microplastics should be banned as a starting point. Then from there, if you can show that you're creating a microplastic which is organic and degrades in a non-toxic way, then maybe we can have a conversation about using those sorts of microplastics. So let's just ban the pendantry and just get rid of it altogether. The industry is basically saying that until they have polluted enough, until they have created a big enough problem, we can't do anything about it, said Vandenberg. Exactly, and this is exactly the problem, is that we don't first value the environment. And in my policies, that's why this is so important. Why a part of my 8 philosophical pillars for peace, the interdependence between humanity and the natural world. And then also below here, I have the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth. So these things in the Declaration of the Unified Rights of Humanity, right? So we protect humanity, we protect the natural world, and then interdependence is the core which ties that all together. So that's such an important thing that we are missing here, that our values don't immediately value the natural world, or ourselves for that matter. Dr. Zhanyun Wang, a senior scientist at ETH Zurich and a member of the Stockholm Convention Scientific Committee, said scientists and policymakers must work with the data they have to make regulatory decisions. We don't have to stop everything with regards to regulation until we have very solid scientific evidence, Wang told Unearth. There is concern about the continued release and accumulation of this chemical in the environment and organisms, which could cause long-term poor mitigability. long-term, poorly mitigable adverse effects on biodiversity, ecosystem services, or human health. Oil and chemical giants, including ExxonMobil, Dow Chemical, DuPont, Ineos, BP, and Shell, are among those represented by the trade groups Kovner appeared to align herself and the EPA with. Representative Alan Lowenthal, Democrat from California, who, along with Senator Ed Markey, Democrat from Massachusetts, reintroduced legislation regarding plastic pollution in March, told Unearth that the Biden administration must seek to lead on this issue domestically and internationally to address the issue associated with the production, disposal, and waste of plastics. Yes, we should be the world global leader on these topics. We're no longer just poisoning the environment with our waste, we're poisoning ourselves, said Lowenthal. This is more than a solid waste or ocean pollution crisis. It is now an environmental justice, international human rights, climate, and public health issue. True statement. True statement. Again, that's why my 8 philosophical pills for peace are so important, because this should be the lens through which we should think of all things. Interdependence of humanity with itself and humanity with the natural world. And these two things are very, very important. Humanity is not above, beyond the laws of the natural world. We are an integral part, destructive part of the ecology of not just this planet, but of the entire cosmos. We are not above it at all. All right, next. Questions, comments, suggestions on that? Pollution, plastic, that sort of thing. I know there's plastics like hemp-based plastics which do degrade. Much of a fan as I am of hemp-based stuff like that. I wonder how it does degrade and if it's okay for the environment to do so. Expect so, but don't know. All right, so this is from Tom Hartmann. He's a renowned leftist. He has his own radio show. He's interviewed, I think he's interviewed Bernie Sanders like every Sunday for many Sundays for a long time, or something like that. All right, trickle-down economics isn't even a new con. America needs to solve its parasitic billionaire problem, or our democracy will continue to crash and burn. This is Tom Hartmann. I think he's got some books written. He has his own YouTube channel and podcasts and stuff like that going on as well. America has to reinvent our understanding of economics after 40 years of living under a tax-cutting, austerity-imposing, Republican-promoted trickle-down Reaganomics scam and return to a Keynesian system that still works in those countries like Norway, New Zealand, Denmark that never adopted austerity. Yeah, and there's been report after report just tearing down Reaganomics. I mean, God, during the Obama era, the Congressional Budget Office did a report on Reaganomics, supply side economics, and it ripped it apart. That it's bad. It's caused harm. I mean, it's not hard to do that sort of a study when you have access to the data, but it's Reaganomics, bad. There's been a lot of reports out that have said the same thing, not just the government. And again, if you look at my policies, this is basically what I'm all about. Like I say, austerity should never be done, right? Tax the rich, give money to people at the bottom. There you go. And have eco-humanistic values. And that's exactly what we're talking about in these countries. And that's what I do in my policies. The core idea of Reaganomics is that if we give huge tax cuts and multi-billion-dollar subsidies to billionaires and giant corporations, that will incentivize these job creators to expand the economy and raise prosperity all around for everyone. In fact, all those giant corporations and billionaires have done is put all that cash in their money bins and use it to buy 400-foot yachts and rocket rides into outer space while destroying unions and holding down wages on working class people. Exactly. Recent study from the London School of Economics has now totally debunked the Reaganomics notion that tax cuts for rich incentivize them to create jobs or lead to economic growth. In fact, such tax cuts only serve one single purpose: to move more of a nation's income and wealth from the bottom 99% up to the money bins of the morbidly rich. And they do nothing whatsoever for the overall economy. Yep, pretty much. Because it takes money to make money, and you're giving them money, so they use it to make more money. To the contrary, Reaganomics has devastated America as a result of Reagan-Bush-Trump tax cuts. Notes from Labor Secretary Robert Reich. Since the start of the pandemic, just 651 American billionaires have gained $1 trillion of wealth. With this windfall, they could send a $3,000 check to every person in America and still be as rich as they were before the pandemic. Reich adds, yet at the same time, more than 20 million Americans are jobless, 8 million have fallen into poverty, and 19 million are at risk of eviction, and 26 million are going hungry. So how did we get here? And have Republicans yet copped to this giant 40-year-long hustle that's still being taught in our colleges and universities by professors subsidized by right-wing billionaires? Fucking Jesus. Yeah, they need to basically replace that bullshit with the textbook, the MMT-based textbook. Actually, I bought the textbook on Kindle, but I haven't read through it yet because that's gonna be a long read. But I have it. It's written by two of the three of the main MMT people. Back in 1980, Republican candidate Ronald Reagan promoted trickle-down economics as a new idea, representing the latest state-of-the-art thinking from billionaire-funded so-called conservative economists. At first, even Republican politicians recognized it as a con. In the 1980 primary, Reagan's main opponent, patrician multimillionaire George H.W. Bush, called it a con job and labeled a con job that he labeled voodoo economics. Exactly. Bush and actual economists then knew what any student of economic history knew: trickle-down was just a money grab by Reagan, who was fronting for his patrons among the very richest Americans. And since the Supreme Court had just, in 1976 and 1978, legalized political bribery by billionaires and corporations under the rubric of money being the same thing as free speech, and therefore protected by the First Amendment, Reagan and his friends were all in. Oh, that's interesting. It's not loading. Okay. I was thinking the Citizens United was the first one. So there must be something that have done the 1976-78 Supreme Court must have done something else to empower this sort of bullshit. But trickle-down wasn't even a new con. Back in the 1890s, it was called horse and sparrow economics. The sales pitch before the era of cars being that if you fed horses more oats than they could normally digest, they drop all that undigested oat in their manure for the sparrows to pick at. Rich people's excess would spill over to the average person. It not only didn't work, it was blamed in part for the Panic of 1896. Warren Harding received horse and sparrow economics in 1920 when he campaigned on dropping the minus 91% top tax bracket down to 25%. Okay, so dropping the then 91% top tax bracket down to 25%. He's elected and kept his promise, the result being the Roaring Twenties, when the rich got fabulously richer while the working people saw their wages actually drop, leading to an explosion of unionization efforts by pissed off workers that were violently suppressed by employers and police. It all came to a startling and final end in 1929 with the Great Crash that set off what was then called the Republican Great Depression. The Republican part of that label largely wore off after the election of the Republican President Dwight Eisenhower in 1952. Republicans stopped talking about horses and sparrows around that time, but the theory never really died. Reagan simply reinvented it in 1980 as supply-side economics, aka also known as trickle-down. Back in 1896 and 1929, people didn't need a detailed multi-decade, multi-country analysis of horse and sparrow to know it was bad news. The Great Panic and the Republican Great Depression pretty much convinced everybody. But somehow, even after 4 economic crashes, the Reagan stock market crash of 1987, the Bush Great Recession of 1992, the second Bush Great Recession of 2008, and the Trump Depression of 2020, and spreading poverty, most voters never managed to put together the cause and effect of trickle-down Reaganomics. This most recent study of trickle-down is probably the most comprehensive effort ever made to figure out what happens when you radically cut taxes on the morbidly rich. Researchers used data from 18 OECD countries covering the last 50 years to investigate the effects of major tax cuts for the rich on income inequality, economic growth, and unemployment. When they compiled those 50 years of data over 18 countries that had engaged in what we call Reaganomics, and most of them call austerity economics, it was even close to what Reagan and his billionaire buddies told us would happen. Our results show, the researchers write, that major tax cuts for the rich increased the top 1% share of pre-tax national income in the years following the reform. The magnitude of the effect is sizable. On average, each major reform leads to a rise in top 1% share of pre-tax national income of 0.8 percentage points. So the rich got richer, but did these, quote, job creators use any little bit of that money to, well, create jobs? No, said the economists at the London School of Economics. Am I a round earther? Elaine Mervin, how you doing? Welcome. I am a round earther, yes. Are you a flat earther? How you doing today? How's your weekend? Yeah, definitely round. Definitely round. You must ask me a question then? Okay. Uh-oh. Where's this one gonna go? What is your question, darling? Taking your time. Type faster. Oh, my God. Okay, if the Earth is constantly in rotation and the Earth is perfectly round, it isn't perfectly round, first of all. How does it maintain its perfect sphere shape? It isn't a perfect sphere. It's not a perfect sphere. First, perfect anything doesn't exist. Right, and then the actual Earth with the water and stuff, you know, get the oceans, and then there's stuff down below there. You've got mountains going up, ridges. It doesn't. That's all going to boil down to whether how the Earth currently looks, and it's not a perfect anything. It's based on, of course, the environment and wind and all that sort of stuff, gravity, all that crazy stuff. Yeah, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect sphere. Again, all that will have to do with gravity and stuff like that, and the pulls of the various gravity of the other bodies that are around it, as well as what came before it when the planet was forming. The results also show that economic performance as measured by real GDP per capita and the unemployment rate is not significantly affected by major tax cuts for the rich. The estimate The estimated effects for these variables are statistically indistinguishable from zero. So tax cuts to the rich do not change GDP per capita or unemployment rates at all. So what is the single largest result of a nation embracing Reaganomics trickle-down austerity tax cut policies? Americans seem to have largely figured this out. Last year, for example, Arizona voters approved a ballot measure, Prop 28, that raised taxes by 3.5% on wealthy people, making more than $250,000 a year. It was designed to raise $940 million a year from those taxes that would all go to fund the state's crisis-ridden public school system. But when working class people are gutted and billionaires make more billions, the stability of democracy suffers, particularly in a nation like the United States, where the Supreme Court legalized political bribery in Citizens United, which I think was 2010. Which explains why this year, when Prop 208 why the Prop 208 tax increase on rich people was to take effect, the Republican-controlled billionaire-funded Arizona legislature passed the largest tax cut for the rich in the state's history. Of course they did. Typically when that's asked, it's federal jobs guarantee versus UBI. I have both of those in my policies to an extent. If you want to see my policies, they're up here. Both are capable of working. I mean, it's the primary thing you have to get through is understanding how federal fiscal policy actually works. Once you do that, then there's nothing we honestly can't do. So federal jobs guarantee is a good thing, but it's meant to be a hirer of last resort, so it's not necessarily supposed to be at the minimum wage, supposed to be below the minimum wage or something like that. Of course, with that being said, we need a living wage or a thriving wage at least at this point. For me, I use progressive basic income, which would be based on the cost of living for where you're at, adjusted by inflation and that sort of a thing. But yeah, that federal jobs guarantee could work, and progressive basic income could work too. And we're going to need both of those, especially as we get on with high levels of technological unemployment and AI and things of that nature. And the problem is with technological unemployment, there aren't going to be enough jobs for people to work at. And that's why progressive basic income is going to be a need. Although the federal jobs guarantee can kind of fill some of that by giving people work to do that, needs to be done. So at some point, the federal jobs guarantee isn't going to be enough. If you go like 50, 60 years, in the future, as automation ramps up, you're going to lose so many jobs, and it's just not going to be enough. Who use welfare leeching off of society, even when those people want to work, but society is built in a way where they can't get a job? Yeah, exactly. People don't understand that the system is systemically and structurally built to impoverish people. That poverty, homelessness, suffering, joblessness is a feature of capitalism, and that's how the rich make their money. It's if this individual is not something the affluent can't profit from, then they can just go and die in a fire because they don't care. The only people leeching off society are the millionaires and the billionaires and the corporations who get socialism. They get plenty of socialism, free money, and we the people get jack shit. We get austerity. Socialism for the rich, right? And then austerity for the 99%. Now, if you look at the data from like UBI, if you drop UBI on these people who are, quote, leeching off society, things change radically for them because they're stable, they want to go to work, they want to start businesses. It has such an incredible positive effect on society. Yeah, people want to work. They really do, if they can. But this requirement that we have to, either you work and are exploited, by businesses and the rich, or you die. California is leeching off society actually because for every $1 in taxes they pay, they get $3 back. Are you referring to? Are you referring to federal tax dollars that they pay? They get, for every $1 federal tax dollar they pay, they get 3 back in subsidies, right, and grants and stuff. Now there isn't any necessary problem with that, because it depends on what level you're talking about taxes. If you're talking about taxes on a federal level, okay, Texas pays 3 in the federal and they only get 1 back. Part of that might be because Texas is Republican and they don't want federal money. I mean, they probably said no to, various things, just like they did with the, they privatized the energy system, which ended up murdering people. Yeah, I'm not familiar with those statistics. But on a federal level, it doesn't really matter. The point at a federal level of taxation is to, reducing inequality is part of that, because actual money on the federal level, taxes on the federal level, does not fund anything. It doesn't do anything. Effectively, it goes away. It just gets, deleted. So, how much they do take in taxes and how much they receive is less relevant as a comparison. Now, where that tax money comes from, that is relevant. If it comes from the bottom, that's problematic. If it comes from the top, that is a good thing. Reducing inequality is one of the primary goals of federal tax policy. It should be, at least, but we don't use it quite that way. But yeah, Texas is problematic. I've seen there's problems in California too. I don't follow it strictly, but there are definitely issues there. And this all comes down to the problems with capitalism. The corruption of our values and how we do things. It always comes down to profit first. And if we can't make profit off it, or profit off you, then you can just go ahead and die in the alley. We don't care, because you can't be profited from. It's this fundamental lack of compassion for not just other humans, but also for the environment that we have, that promotes these horrific laws that gives money to the 1%, the people in charge, instead of actually using the money and the resources to make life better for other humans and for the natural world. Is capitalism bad, or is the perverted thing that capitalism has become? Well, capitalism in and of itself isn't, bad as just a concept. I have a whole I have a whole bunch of posts here on the issue with capitalism. This is my really big one, but the core one that really gets into it, that explains, it's a short read, it's a 9-minute read. It's tension within methods of exchange. This talks about how within monetary systems, why everything is messed up. It's right here. People who are regulars here, tired of hearing me talk about this fucking post, but this is really what it boils down to. How corporations have gotten to the point where they have audacity to trash talk their customers like Disney. Well, it becomes, I go through it kind of here. Ultimately, it comes down to, with unequal power dynamics, with unequal power dynamics and inequality comes sociopathy. They become sociopaths, basically. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but go ahead and get this right. Basically, the moment you have a method of exchange, either you're trading or there's money, at the very moment you have an exchange going on, there is this tension between benefiting from yourself, benefiting for yourself or your tribe, right? Yourself, your family, your business, your nation, or doing what's right for humanity. And what typically wins, of course, is benefit to tribe. That leads to competition. because in any exchange you want to maximize your return, and so does the person you're going into the exchange with. That automatically puts everyone antagonistic towards each other because they're competing against each other. That is going to be the very foundation of why the entire human civilization is messed up, is that the foundation of human civilization is an antagonistic socioeconomic system. And of course that leads to benefit. It's just the only value system we have is benefit, no matter the cost to humanity or the environment. It's just benefit. That's it. Get that profit. Nothing else matters. Doesn't matter who you murder, or who you destroy, or what you destroy. Just get the profit. That's the only thing that matters. And of course, that leads to exploitation, which then leads to sociopathy and the psychopathy. Once you have high levels of unequal power, unequal money, they can do whatever they want because they have power and we don't. And there are ways around this to deal with it. Is corporatism the same as capitalism, or in your opinion on the difference? My technical knowledge, you're asking me if I make a technical delineation between those as things. I don't myself, because a part of capitalism is, the existence of corporations and businesses. That's foundational. Corporations and businesses are foundational to capitalism, because that's what initially started it off, right, in like Finland or the Netherlands, right, with the shipping companies or whatever. Yeah, for me, I would consider them the same. So at the end of the day, it just comes down to when people are automatically pitted against each other, that creates competition and eventually sociopathy. So that people care less about the harms caused to others as long as we in my tribe benefit. And that pretty much explains the entirety of all the problems we have as a globalized civilization. And it's hard to get beyond, because that is what the system rewards. The system rewards exploitation. The system rewards pollution, climate change. Oh, so that article's here. This is about how Peter Thiel, one of the founders of PayPal, he has like $5 billion into a Roth IRA account. The Roth IRA is meant for normal people. It's an IRA that when you put money in, you put money in that you've already put taxes in. You already paid the taxes on, so that it can sit in the IRA and then just build tax-free, and even to the point when you take it out, it's tax-free as well. It isn't meant for 1%ers to amass a fortune, and that's what he's done through some questionable practices. And government at various points in time has tried to put an end to that, but of course they can't, because this guy and other people like him own the government. It's a long read, so it's about an hour read. Read the whole thing. And if you want to read more about capitalism and its issues, I've got a whole bunch of stuff over here in the sidebar. I've got my Q&A, Capitalism Resource-Based Economies Q&A from Facebook. This one is really big, and it links to all of my other writings on capitalism, resource-based economies. The military junta in Myanmar has detained an official from George Soros' Open Society Foundation and has frozen the billionaire financiers' bank accounts in the country under the suspicion that the group funded elements opposed to the February coup in the country, according to news reports. Oh, that's interesting. Soros. I can't imagine that'll last long, because he's rich and all that, because they can do whatever they want. Yeah, all they're gonna have to do is pay off some people, and then the accounts will be unfrozen again. Well, we'll see. He's too rich to have any laws apply to him. It's still, yeah. Well, I wouldn't say funny. I'd say mildly amusing. If they actually took his money and froze his accounts and held him accountable for what he was doing, that would be funny. This is just, it barely slows him down. But if there's actual justice involved, that would be awesome. Justice in this world does not apply to the rich. Oh, no, get back here. All right. Did I finish this already? I can't even remember. What was I doing? It derailed my brain. Okay, no, I didn't finish it. Okay. Okay, this is talking about Reaganomics and its devastation, which explains why this year, when Proposition 208 tax increase on rich people was to take effect, the Republican-controlled billionaire-funded Arizona legislature passed the largest tax cut for the rich in the state's history. Altogether, Arizona Republicans passed and Governor Ducey signed the $1.9 billion tax cut that, as the Prescott Valley News notes, mainly benefits the wealthy to shield high-earning taxpayers from the effects of a new 3.5% tax surcharge voters approved in November to boost education funding. Oh, fuck both of them. Joe Biden's a war criminal, and Trump's a liar, a con man, and a fraud who should be in jail for many reasons. Fuck Joe Biden. And Kamala Harris. They're both horrific. One created the systemic and structural racism through the 1994, crime bill. Kamala Harris put people in jail for pot, and she also held back evidence that would set people free that she put to jail. She's horrific. Fuck them both. They don't care about you. They don't care about us. They're all fucking corporate whores. And they all need to be in jail for war crimes. Especially Biden. It's only in Senate for 180 years, so it's no big deal if you were in Senate that long. You'd be a war criminal too. Pretty much. I mean, my God, dude. Yeah, he just needs to go away. All presidents need to be in jail for war crimes because, there's only, historically, there's only been, 20 years in our U.S.'s history where we have not been inside some sort of a military action. And that's not good. Yeah, it's not good. The United States is the largest terrorist organization in the world. I mean, it's horrific what we do. His brain, though, can actually use the 25th Amendment? What is the 25th Amendment? Oh, yeah. Yeah, I said when they announced that Kamala Harris was going to be his VP, I said within the first 6 months to 2 years, he will step down. Yeah. I expect Kamala to be, president within the first 2 years. That's what I expect. Or if they hold him out long enough, he won't run the second term, and then she'll run from there. Yeah. Yep. I said that. That was I put that on Facebook. Kamala. She's horrible. They're both bad. They're both so bad. So fucking bad. I mean, she went to Venezuela, right? And said, all you people don't come to the United States. You'll be turned away. Oh my God. I do. This is just the one for my streaming. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have 7 other tabs. I have 7 other windows with a bunch of other tabs down below. Yeah, I have way too much stuff I work on. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff I haven't gone over yet in stream that I haven't gotten to. A lot of this is tech-based stuff. And eventually I'll weed some of this out because it'll be a little bit old. But yeah, like I've got a whole bunch of tech-based stuff over here that we haven't gone over yet. But yeah, so much stuff. So much stuff I want to go over. Never enough time. Oh shit, it's 7 o'clock. Okay, so I mean, illegal immigration is bad, but I don't know how. It's really how you look at it. Well, here's the way I approach it. If the United States is fucked with a country, we should automatically accept immigrants and refugees from those countries, which means pretty much the entire Central and South America, the Middle East, right? We've fucked and destroyed most of that up. So it's that simple. And then in like in Mexico, we need to have a giant ass facility there for INS to process people, and specifically have language classes there available and everything. Well, undocumented, I mean, no one is illegal on stolen land, as far as I'm concerned. Undocumented is irrelevant, honestly, because they mostly came here to escape from, you know, whatever they're escaping from. And helping them recover from that is what we should be doing, especially because we most likely caused the problem to why they came here undocumented. And if the United States' actual immigration policies were realistic and weren't fucked up, these people wouldn't be undocumented. Yeah, it does suck. You're exactly right. It does suck. That's why the United States needs to have a very open immigration policy. And the reason why they chose to be undocumented is because the United States is fucked in the head, because we're so right-wing that, you know, destroying people's lives. I mean, hell, that we've recently, last year, deported several military people who were here legally and sent them back to their country, even though they haven't been there in like 30 years. The U.S. government doesn't care. I mean, my wife is from Belarus. So she's an immigrant. She's hopefully going to be a citizen sometime soon. But we still worry about it because of how fucked in the brain the U.S. is when it comes to immigrants. Yeah, of course it does. Of course it does. Yeah. And that's always an issue, right? When it comes to, of course, Central and South America, Africa, Europe, you know, if you're in Western Europe, you're fine. Eastern Europe, not necessarily. Like Belarus and the U.S., of course, has a strained relationship. You just don't know, you know, depending on who's going to be, you know, in office, how that's going to affect immigration. Yeah, no, for me, no one is illegal on stolen land. That's the way I approach it. And every moment we keep these people marginalized in the darkness, that's one more dollar that we have not taken in taxes, or in them going to school and making an amazing discovery or whatever. If it's like a country we have been at war with for a long time, then I don't know if that works really. Like, so if it's like a country we have been at war with for a long time, well, honestly, I don't care where they're from. We should accept people from everywhere. Period. If we can provide them a better life, they want to come here, we should be doing it. I mean, because anyone who comes here, they pay taxes, life is better for everyone. And then also, as a part of that discussion, if you really want to prevent refugees and immigration, then A, you stop destroying those countries, but also B, you work towards shifting those countries to first world status. You shift them to first world status, then all of a sudden there are no problems with immigrants and refugees. Unless you get into climate change issues, and that's a whole other thing, right? The only countries that we have issues with immigration are those who are from second and third world countries. If you get rid of them, elevate them to first world countries, which is what we should be doing in the first place, then you get rid of that whole problem. But of course, that'll never be done under monetary systems or capitalism, because profit is all that matters. Africa's weird, though. It's only weird in that the West has been raping it for resources for hundreds of years. I would too. I would just love to see in Africa where the West has given back everything that we've stolen. That's definitely not at all impossible. Not impossible. Unlikely, sure, because the West is systemically and structurally racist, especially the United States. But it could be done. If the United States, like I've said, if the United States chose to no longer be the largest terrorist organization in the world, and if it chose to, actually help the world, we would be starting in Africa and lifting them up to first world status, building infrastructure, education, farming. Only that, the natives there are rivaled. Well, yeah, a lot of that has to do with poverty, though, and resource scarcity. And a lot of that's because the West has been stealing we've been stealing all the resources. All of that will change. You shift them to first world status, and all of that changes. To an extent. I mean, there's still that, indigenous tribalism, which will remain in some way, much like the indigenous people here in the United States, if they actually had choices. That will stay to an extent, but as you shift them to first world status, a lot of that will change because education, technology, and all that sort of stuff. Could be. South Africa's rich too. Yeah. A lot of these countries, could choose to do that, but they don't, because again, there's no profit in helping others, and that's the fundamental problem with capitalism. Capitalism necessitates the creation of boundaries, the creation of scopes of tribes, nation states. Nation states are a requirement for capitalism to work in order to maintain competitiveness between one large group, one large tribe, and another. And as long as that exists, it's going to be hard to do that without someone like the United States. I don't know much about that. I don't know anything about that. I don't know. I don't know. So yeah, it would take. Was damming the Nile River? Oh. I don't think that's probably a good idea. Why? Doing it for power? Flooding? Yes. Okay. If it was doing for power, I don't know. I don't know that much about that area. I don't sound like a fan of it currently, but I don't know what and why or whatever's going on with it. Okay, I'll take your word for it. If you can find an article on it, throw it in here. Oh, if you're in violence, yeah. Maybe I'll have to find an article on that. I gotta get going. I've reached my 2-hour mark here, and the wife and daughter are gonna be here in a little bit. So I leave the end here for some random comments that you can make before we call it a day. And if you like what you hear here, please feel free to go ahead and follow me. I've got Facebook and YouTube and all that sort of stuff down there as well. And if you want to support me, I've got Patreon down there too, and all that stuff as well. Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, that sounds good. That sounds good, man. Yeah, send the links to me in DMs. That'll be great. I'll take a look at that. Educate myself on what's going on over there. So have a great week. I'm on Tuesdays at 5, Thursdays at 5 Central, and Saturdays at 3 p.m. as well. So you can catch me then too. Yeah. All right. Have a great week, dude. And we'll see you guys later.
it's just me and you. Let's make up all the rules. Count to 10 and watch the stars turn blue. Watch the stars.